Did you know Nintendo scrapped plans for a Skyward Sword second quest starring Zelda? Or that the Mario and Rabbids director wanted to make a Wind Waker spin-off? Or that Twilight Princess almost got a sequel that reused its assets akin to Majora's Mask? By our count, there's about 20 scrapped Zelda projects. We've already covered most of them, but we've got new info on those, and we'll cover projects we haven't before. So we figured we'd throw it all together and cover everything in one big video. We're not limiting ourselves just to cancelled games though. We'll also touch on some major rejected pitches and unrealized ambitions. We won't be covering rumored games though, only plans that are proven to exist. This is every lost Zelda game. We're not going in strictly chronological order, but we do want to start with Zelda 1, more specifically a 3DS remake of Zelda 1. At E3 2010, Nintendo revealed the 3DS, along with a new 3D Classics brand. Basically, NES and Super Nintendo games rebuilt from the ground up with 3D visuals and many subtle improvements. For example, Kid Icarus added layered backgrounds, a day-night cycle, tightened up the physics, and the Famicom version's save system and better music. Nintendo showed 18 vertical slice tech demos at E3, including Mario, Metroid, and The Legend of Zelda. But only 6 got turned into full games, due to a few problems. For starters, Nintendo sold them on the eShop for around $6, the same price as Virtual Console games, so folks mistook them as the same thing, not realizing they'd been completely rebuilt from scratch. Another problem was division on what 3D Classics should be. Devs kept on updating the graphics, but Iwata and Miyamoto wanted visually faithful recreations for the sake of nostalgia, and told them to, quote, put it back the way it was. 3D Classics were expensive to make, sold poorly, and were misunderstood by gamers and devs alike. So they got discontinued, and a dozen games shown at E3 never got made, including Zelda, which is a shame, because it could have been the definitive way to experience Link's first adventure. That same year, a Tingle horror game got cancelled. In the 2000s, Japanese studio Vanpool made a series of Tingle DS games, none of which released in America. I know how hated the character of Tingle is in the US, said producer Kensuke Tanabe. I know that American people cannot stand Tingle. He's pretty well liked in Japan though, and Famitsu rated Ripened Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love fairly high. After that game was finished, Vanpool began working on another sequel, this time a horror game. Next to nothing is known about it, except Tanabe's declaration that it was, quote, cancelled due to a variety of reasons. We translated some Vanpool interviews but couldn't find out more details. However, we could glean a few indirect clues, like that an unused idea for an early entry was Tingle kidnapping townspeople, dressing them up in green Tingle outfits, and basically enslaving them to do his chores. Not that that would have been the horror game structure, but it gives you an idea how they think. Vanpool works out of a house that reeks of body odor, and in these interviews come across as free-spirited, eccentric, and honestly, kinda strange. Which maybe you'd have to be to want to make a Tingle horror game. On the other hand, Nintendo did agree to the concept. After reading these interviews, our best guess is that it would have been satirical and silly, more like Luigi's Mansion than Resident Evil, but a lot weirder and funnier. The previous entry was a parody of The Wizard of Oz, so this may have been a parody as well. Unfortunately, Vanpool come across as difficult to work with. For example, Nintendo had to swap out supervisors 6 times while they were making Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, and said there were trust issues. That might explain the horror game's cancellation and the secrecy around its development. After that, Vanpool started making a Goron game where you roll around killing enemies pinball style, guided by the DS stylus. They wrote a theme called My Goron Song and pitched it to Tanabe, but it, quote, fell flat spectacularly, and the only thing he praised was the playability. Tanabe had spent a lot of time in Texas supervising retro studios. He saw armadillos there and thought they looked rolly, and he thinks of Texas as sort of cowboy-like. So he told Vanpool to cut out the Zelda references and rework the game around an armadillo in the Wild West. It ultimately turned into Dylan's Rolling Western, which even at the time, reviewers thought was Zelda-like in a lot of ways. They even compared it to Goron Link from Majora's Mask, despite not knowing back then that it originally was a Goron game. Dylan's Rolling Western was well received and got a couple sequels that scored similarly. After that, Vanpool got turned into a support studio and helped make Kirby games for Switch. That went on for a few years until, sadly, the studio shut down in 2023. You might remember Davide Soliani from his emotional moment at E3 2017 as Miyamoto showed off Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle. Davide was the game's creative director and a lifelong fan. 15 years earlier, he heard Miyamoto was visiting his hometown of Milan, Italy. So he found his hotel and camped 10 hours in the rain for a chance to meet him. Not long after they met, Wind Waker came out and blew Davide away. So he dreamt up a Game Boy Advance spin-off. We touched on this story 5 years ago, but now we've got some extra information. Davide actually saw our video, and we talked a few times afterwards. But when we asked for more about Zelda, he wasn't able to get Nintendo and Ubisoft's permission. So we interviewed his partner on the project, pixel artist Fabio Paghetti. He told us we were both in love with Wind Waker on GameCube, and Nintendo handhelds were the major focus of Ubisoft Milan at the time. Davide and I worked together on Rayman, Jungle Book, Donald Duck, The Mummy, and Tomb Raider games for Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. So we were wondering how Wind Waker would look on Game Boy Advance. We were always talking and tinkering together about possible concepts and pitches for the studio, and this looked like such a nice fit. In their free time, they spent a month putting together a pitch for Ubisoft management, and if that went well, they'd pitch it directly to Nintendo. Fabio said, "My idea was to switch between Link and the villain, but the villain wasn't Ganon, it was a sort of wizard similar to Link. My proposal to Davide was the game would have two parallel stories, and at one point you have to decide how to end the game, with either Link or the other character. You'd face the true final boss, Ganon, of course." Davide had his own ideas, but like we said, couldn't share them with us. Presumably, if it was greenlit, the game would have ended up as a mix of their ideas, or something entirely different under Nintendo's supervision. But none of the plot details made it into the pitch anyway, just this pixel art and animation tests that have been lost to time. Unfortunately, their bosses rejected it. Fabio told us they were probably scared to show it to Nintendo, and intimidated by such a big IP. But at the time, Nintendo had already let Capcom make the Oracle games, and they even lent it out to Philips for that god-awful CDI trilogy. So who knows? Maybe Nintendo would have let Ubisoft take a swing at it too. After Mario & Rabbids' success and its highly acclaimed sequel, we were hoping Davide might finally get the opportunity for a Zelda game, but then he resigned from Ubisoft in 2024. Him and some of the Mario & Rabbids team founded their own studio, saying they were going to make their dream game. It was recently revealed as Bradley the Badger, with gameplay described as Mario meets Portal, an inspiration from rare titles like Banjo-Kazooie. It's still in the works, but Davide says if someday Nintendo wants to work together again, he'd be up for it. Around the same time that Davide and Fabio were working on their GBA pitch, Nintendo was cooking up a Wind Waker sequel of their own. The proposed setting for Wind Waker 2 was not on the sea, but on land, remembers art director Takizawa. The desire to depict Toon Link on a horse riding around the Great Plains was irresistible. Development lasted about a year. Even though the first game was critically a success, commercially, it was a disappointment. If the next game didn't sell better, director Aonuma said it could mean the end of the franchise. Back then, the vast majority of Zelda fans were in America, most of them teenagers. Nintendo of America told me the toon shading technique was giving the impression that Wind Waker was for a younger audience, remembers Aonuma. It alienated the upper teen audience that had represented the typical Zelda player. Having heard that, I began to worry about whether Wind Waker 2, which used a similar presentation, was something that would actually sell. So, the only thing we could do was give American teenagers the Zelda they wanted. So, at the end of 2003, I went to Miyamoto and said, I want to make a realistic Zelda. Miyamoto basically said, okay then, let's make it Super Ocarina of Time. 3 years later, it launched as Twilight Princess and broke records as the best-selling game in the series, which was desperately needed for the franchise to continue. Shortly after Wind Waker 2, there was a Zelda DS project. You might remember seeing headlines about us getting into legal trouble for talking about it a few years ago. Because unlike other games in today's video, this one was still secret till we broke the story. We got our hands on the full 22-page pitch document, and if you want every last detail, you can go back and watch the original video. Because today we're going to tell a more concise version of the story plus an update on the fallout. The project was called Heroes of Hyrule and created by Retro Studios, who, by the way, are fully owned by Nintendo. All their developers are first-party Nintendo employees, and their salaries are paid directly by the Big N. Heroes of Hyrule was led by their top designer, Mark Pacini, the director of the Metroid Prime trilogy. Back then, Retro was only big enough to make one console game at a time, but in 2004, they wanted to expand with a DS side project. Link's been missing for 100 years in Heroes of Hyrule, so you mostly play as a boy named Corey, along with a Goron, Zora, and Rito, each with their own backstory and unique abilities. There's a time travel mechanic where most of the game takes place 100 years in the past and plays like Final Fantasy Tactics, but with Zelda-style additions. Between chapters, you return to the present and play in real time, exploring Corey's town and collecting pages from the Cursed Book of Ganon, which unlocks more of the past. It all culminates in Link's return in a twist ending. The game was basically Zelda Tactics, but the developers told us the direction was really more of a puzzle RPG adventure game. But Nintendo rejected the pitch, so it never got made. Now, for the legal update. When we broke the story 4 years ago, Nintendo hit us with a copyright strike and deleted our video. Strikes are a big deal, because if you get 3 of them, your whole channel may get deleted. Forever. The way YouTube works is if we just rolled over and took it, the strike would have expired after 90 days, and that'd be the end of it unless we somehow got 2 more. That's the safer play, but instead, we got a lawyer and fought the strike. That gave Nintendo 2 options: either give up or give our video back, or escalate into a full-blown lawsuit, at which point our fight would leave YouTube and go to the courts. Honestly, we were wondering if maybe we should have just taken the loss, rather than risk Nintendo making an example out of us. Nintendo had a time limit of 10 days to decide, and to our surprise, they just never responded. It was silence on their end till the clock ran out and we won. The video came back and we never heard from them again. We also want to thank you guys, because we got a lot of support on social media and news websites, and the resulting bad PR might have also factored into Nintendo's backing down. Regardless of why, we just counted ourselves lucky, but unfortunately they also went after our sources, but we'll talk more about that after the next game. A few years after Heroes of Hyrule, Retro started working on another Zelda project, this time for the Wii, with Sheik as the protagonist. Vague rumors began circulating, but it wasn't until 2020 that concept art found its way online. It revealed a darker take on the series, with the artist noting it would have been the Master Sword's origin story, taking place in the series' downfall timeline. After it all went viral, IGN reached out to the artist for comment. He said Nintendo probably never saw any of it, then deleted his internet presence and disappeared. He'd left the gaming industry long before, calling it exploitative and abusive. Since he said Nintendo never saw it, for a while fans thought his art was all that got made. Eventually, we managed to find 3 retro devs who worked on it and found out Nintendo actually had seen it. Not only that, they greenlit pre-production, and Retro spent 9 months developing a prototype called Project X. But we were told it didn't play like a traditional Zelda. Instead, it was a dumbed-down motion control concept that the devs likened to whack-a-mole. You'd be standing still, some wolves jump at you one at a time, and you just flick the Wiimote to kill them. They told us, a game is a series of interesting decisions, but the problem with this game was there's actually fewer decisions involved than whack-a-mole. Because with whack-a-mole, you've got all these moles popping up, and you've got to prioritize which one do I hit, which ones do I ignore, what order am I going to whack these moles in. There's actually some thinking involved. Whereas with Sheik, it's pure stimulus response. So if you don't have that level of interesting decision-making, you don't really have gameplay. They said the overworld traversal was even worse, describing it as a hot mess. But Retro higher-ups thought it was the right direction, so the devs kept their heads down and did what they were told. After 9 months, they pitched the prototype to Nintendo. If they approved, Project X would have entered full production, but Nintendo didn't like what they saw. It might have been salvageable, but drama ensued that same week, and Retro's best designers left to form a new studio. With their top guys gone, Retro ended up making Donkey Kong Returns instead, because a 2D platformer's easier to develop. More staff resigned in the aftermath, because they felt their talents were being wasted on a side-scroller. We told a longer version of this tale 4 years ago, so here's some updates. Some of you left comments saying a Master Sword origin story doesn't make sense in the downfall timeline, because the Master Sword already existed before the timeline split. At the risk of sounding like fake fans, that honestly hadn't occurred to us. We ran that contradiction past our sources, who told us the plot wasn't set in stone. A lot of it was changing, and all theoretical anyway, since the prototype was gameplay only. If Nintendo greenlit full production, a lot of the story and setting would have changed in development. They said even Sheik being the protagonist wasn't guaranteed. Now, to get back to the legal problems we alluded to earlier, our original Project X and Heroes of Hyrule videos were published a week apart and got mixed up in the same troubles. We were lucky to escape, but Nintendo also went after the guys we interviewed. For privacy reasons, we won't tell their stories, but suffice it to say, it was unpleasant for them. We knew Nintendo was secretive, but we underestimated how far they'd go to silence former employees about 20-year-old projects, including ones that were never even made. They went after another one of our sources soon after for a different video. The guy suffered a heart attack in the process, though thankfully he survived. We've interviewed over a dozen retro devs, but after these 2 incidents, we decided not to pursue any more stories about retro studios. So, our apologies, but don't expect any more going forward. At the end of the day, it's just video games, and it is not worth risking other people's lives and livelihoods. These are people who have families to look after, and running a story just to try and inform people about some interesting background about one of their favorite video game series, it's not worth risking their security. So we are very, very sorry. All right, let's leave that unpleasantness behind us and shift focus to Japan. because shortly before Project X, Nintendo released Link's Crossbow Training. Despite being a low-budget spin-off that reused Twilight Princess assets, Crossbow Training managed to sell 6 million copies, which is more than the entire Metroid Prime trilogy combined. That's a big reason why Retro Management wanted to make a whack-a-mole game in the first place. It was cheaper to produce, and in the early Wii era, that's the kind of game people were buying. But originally, Link's Crossbow Training wasn't going to be a $20 shooter. It was going to be more of a sequel. As Miyamoto tells it, the terrain created for Twilight Princess was vast, and honestly, I really thought there was more we could do with it. Like how after we finished Ocarina of Time, we decided to make Majora's Mask as a kind of side story. We usually only release a new Zelda every 3 to 5 years, but we thought it would be great to make something for people that really enjoyed Twilight Princess. By now, Miyamoto was in a supervisor position and not a director running day-to-day operations. So, in his absence, the Zelda team started cooking up grand ideas that Miyamoto said were more like epic tales than side stories. It's not super well known, but Miyamoto's actually a big fan of first-person shooters. That's why he pressured Retro to make Metroid Prime first-person. Originally, he even wanted Ocarina of Time to be first-person, and he also likes short dev cycles. So when he saw the Zelda team dreaming bigger than he expected, he told them to dial back their ambitions and make a budget shooter instead, with short stages, no bosses, and no cutscenes. They were kind of shocked, he remembers. It was like killing all the ideas they were working with until then. So he said, you know what? Let's see what a focus group thinks. Then they made a prototype and ran it past some gamers, including Zelda fans. If they didn't like it, Miyamoto said he'd scrap the shooter idea. But the focus group loved it. The Zelda team kept pushing though and fought for 3 bosses. Miyamoto compromised in the end and let them make 1 boss. Japan doesn't play first-person shooters much, but Miyamoto hoped this could introduce them to the genre, so he called it Link's Crossbow Training, as in training Japanese people to play shooters. But in the end, it was mostly Americans who bought it. Twilight Princess director Aonuma was presumably part of the team that didn't want to make Link's Crossbow Training, but it seems he had a change of heart during development, because after it was done, he started pushing for a sequel. To tell you the truth, I actually wanted to create Link's Crossbow Training 2, he remembers. I thought that we should do something more and better in the field of the first-person shooter, based on our experience of the first game. For example, I was thinking that maybe we could intensify the multiplayer mode. The original game was really just a solo game, but I thought that we could add a true online multiplayer mode using Wi-Fi. Ultimately though, it never happened because, quote, a lot of people inside Nintendo insisted that I should work on a new Legend of Zelda title rather than working on more Crossbow Training. Around the time they were finishing Skyward Sword, the developers wanted to add a second quest. Like older games, it'd be essentially a new game plus that recontextualizes and remixes the game world. At the start of the main story, our heroes are on their loft wings when suddenly a tornado sucks Zelda below the clouds, and Link has to spend most of the game searching for her. In the second quest, you'd play as Zelda, doing everything that happened off-screen in the first. Waking up from her fall, exploring the surface world, meeting Impa, sealing herself in the past, and so on. The reasons why it never got made aren't public, but regardless, what they ended up doing was taking the second quest's story and turning it into a cutscene montage that plays during the endgame credits. So even if we can't experience it for ourselves, at least we can see what Zelda was up to during Link's adventure. Meanwhile, 3D Mario's director Koichi Hayashida wanted to make a Zelda spin-off that, spoiler alert, ended up becoming Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. The project began when the Mario team wanted to experiment with a whole new style of game for the upcoming Wii U. Every stage would be a standalone miniature world, a diorama you can spin around with the camera. But according to Hayashida, the thing we noticed was that if Mario could jump, the stages become pretty big. so we wondered whether it would be possible to make a game with a character who can't jump. Our level designer Hirotake submitted an idea to Mr. Miyamoto, the father of both Super Mario and Zelda, to use Link as the character. Hirotake made a papier-mâché Zelda diorama and pitched it to Miyamoto, spinning it around to simulate the camera mechanic. Miyamoto liked it, but thought it was a pitch for physical dioramas they'd sell in stores, like Lego sets. When Hirotake said, no, it's a Zelda video game, Miyamoto soured and said no. But he would let them include it as a minigame in Mario 3D World. Then Link got swapped with Captain Toad, who can't jump either because of his heavy backpack. After 3D World wrapped up, Miyamoto liked the Captain Toad stages so much he pushed for a full game. 1 year later, it released as Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. The first boss was a dragon that kinda looks like Valoo from Wind Waker. According to Hayashida, it was a leftover from Treasure Tracker's origins as a Zelda game. The other 60 stages are tiny renditions of Mario history, but Zelda sets in the same vein would have been cool to see, with a tiny Kokiri Forest, Clock Town, Coralint Island, and so on. Looking back, Hayashida said, if Hirotake had given a better presentation, there's a chance it would have been a different game with Zelda instead. Hirotake took Miyamoto's rejection so hard, he literally set his diorama on fire. He said, I burned it. It was such a bad memory that I decided to let it die. Okay, back to the Zelda team. After Skyward Sword sold even less than Wind Waker, they decided to reinvent Zelda itself. Breaking the conventions of the Zelda series was a goal right from the very start, remembers director Fujibayashi. It was anything goes. They considered Hyrule getting invaded by aliens who would abduct cattle and run amok. The extraterrestrial threat was so great, Link and Ganon would have to set aside their differences and join forces. Fujibayashi also wanted to return to some of Minish Cap's ideas, saying, we could have all these tiny-sized towns, and Link himself could shrink. We really wanted to have them in there for the gameplay, but sadly had to give up on the idea. Interviews and the Masterworks art book show all kinds of crazy concepts they were throwing around. Ayanuma said, we really needed to develop a bigger world, but we've actually never done that. So a lot of it was trial and error, and we had to feel things out. Before Breath of the Wild even released though, Aonuma revealed what was on his mind for a sequel. He said, I would like to take what I learned from Breath of the Wild and see if we can somehow fuse those learning points into another multiplayer Zelda. For example, like Triforce Heroes and Four Swords. That's definitely a possibility, and we will continue to experiment throughout the Zelda franchise. Ultimately, they went another direction instead, and 6 years later, we got a strictly single-player experience in Tears of the Kingdom. Alright, let's rewind a bit, back to the series' beginning. Originally, Zelda 1 was conceived as more sci-fi than medieval fantasy. The Triforce were electronic chips, the story jumped between the past and the future, and the protagonist linked them together. That's why he's called Link. But they ended up taking more inspiration from Lord of the Rings instead, and Miyamoto's childhood exploring the outdoors. Zelda 2 was designed by a different team, as a very different game, with combat inspired by the beat-em-up Kung Fu and RPG elements influenced by Dragon Quest. After that, Zelda 3 was going to be another departure. Miyamoto said, ever since I started making the first game in the series, I've been saying that the third Zelda will feature a party, one that consists of the protagonist, who's a mix between an elf and a fighter, a magic user, and a girl. That's the sort of thing I'm thinking I'd like to put in Zelda 3. Like its predecessors, it was originally meant for the Famicom Disk System. There was also some flirtation with returning to Zelda 1's unused sci-fi themes, and Miyamoto wanted a more open experience with multiple paths forward, so the player would get lost and spend a real-life year reaching the game's conclusion. Instead of light and dark worlds, there were originally 3 worlds, but all of those ideas eventually fell by the wayside due to memory constraints, worries about confused players, and other concerns. And it's unclear how many of these concepts overlapped and which were separate. Ultimately, we got A Link to the Past instead. A couple years later, Zelda was taking its first steps into 3D. Not with Ocarina of Time, though. Instead, it was Adventure of Link on a Super Famicom cartridge, enhanced by the Super FX chip. Across Miyamoto's career, Zelda 2's the game he thinks he could have refined more, and this was his chance to make it happen. We heard Star Fox 64's Japanese strategy guide had some info inside, which seemed like a weird place to hide it, but after buying a copy and having it translated, the connection made sense. It contained an interview with Zelda 2's all-star team, including Star Fox 64 director Shimizu, Ocarina programmer Morita, and Majora art director Imamura. The three of us were working on a Super Famicom version of The Adventure of Link, says Shimizu. But then the 64 wave came, and I told Miyamoto it would take 2 years to make this Link game. He asked me what the heck I was talking about. Miyamoto was shocked and had no idea it was going to take so long. It was 1995, Super Famicom was on the way out, and N64 was just a year away. So he cancelled the project and told him to make Star Fox 64 instead. Link's Awakening writer Koizumi was involved too. In another interview, he said, "I had actually been making Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, in polygons with Miyamoto. We were experimenting with a thin polygon Link seen from the side and fighting with his sword. Chanbara was a pending issue at the time. We couldn't really bring the game into form at that time, but I kept that desire to achieve a sword-fighting Zelda game until I joined the Ocarina of Time team." Chanbara is an exaggerated samurai sword style, by the way, which is how Link fights in Ocarina. Years later, a GigaLeak revealed 3D models that appeared to come from the abandoned project. They were found in a file called Koizumi from July '94, which implies development lasted around a year. They were discovered by a reverse engineer named Starzon, who put them in the Star Fox engine so he could see them in action. We asked his take on them, and he told us the models were definitely tied to the Koizumi quote, but looked like very early experiments, and not what Link would have looked like if the game had been finished. Unfortunately, that's where the trail runs cold, so we're not sure if it was going to be a faithful remake, a reimagining, or maybe even a sequel. We spoke briefly with one of the developers, but he refused to share anything that wasn't already made public. Hopefully, someday, more comes to light, but for now, there's still a lot of mystery surrounding Link's first footsteps into the third dimension. While we're on the topic, we want to briefly address a couple fake Zelda 2 remakes. After another GigaLeak, preservationist Protodude announced the discovery of 16-bit Link sprites, which at the time looked to originate from a cancelled Satellaview remake. The story went viral and got picked up by news sites and YouTubers. After some time passed, we checked in with Protodude for an update. He said, "Further research has come out, and it appears those sprites were for Super Donkey, a very, very early Yoshi's Island prototype. Basically, Super Donkey's protagonist could transform into other Nintendo characters, including Link. In other words, there never was a Satellaview remake. Likewise, there was also a Game Boy Advance tech demo that was reported and long believed to be part of another Zelda 2 remake. We covered this years ago, so go watch the full video if you want more details. But, long story short, the tech demo was real, and we have it. But the connection to Zelda was fabricated by Brian Stelter, back when he was a teenager running a Nintendo fan site. You know, the guy who used to host Reliable Sources on CNN. He wanted an exclusive scoop for his fan site, but in reality, the tech demo was just showing off the Game Boy Advance hardware and had nothing to do with Zelda. Probably the series' most famous cancelled game Ura Zelda was a 64DD expansion to Ocarina of Time that promised new areas, dungeons, minigames, and more. Miyamoto likened it to Zelda 1's New Game Plus, with higher difficulty and remixed locations for items, dungeons, and more. Zelda 1's New Game Plus has no in-game title. Western fans call it Second Quest, but in Japan, it's often referred to as Ura Zelda, which translates to Another Zelda, or Zelda's flip side. And that's what the new Ura was going to be, only more ambitious. Miyamoto said there'd also be, quote, the random element. Every time you go in a dungeon, the composition will be different. For example, if a treasure chest was in a certain place the first time you entered a dungeon, it won't be there next time. It'll be somewhere else. We wouldn't be able to design our own dungeons, but we could download new dungeons and share data with other players. Potentially hundreds of dungeons, Miyamoto said. In another interview, he teased, "We've already talked about a network Zelda as an interesting idea. The assistance of other players in the network could motivate a player's active participation instead of the traps or secrets that I create." We asked Giles Goddard, an Ocarina dev sitting next to Miyamoto in that interview, if they actually worked on those network features.
Yes. And I want to stay alive, so I'm not going to say what.
Unfortunately, what those features were remains a secret. During the last 2 years of Ocarina's development, Miyamoto teased a lot of ideas for the expansion, but eventually narrowed the scope to just remixed dungeons. But director Aonuma didn't want to do it, and didn't think it could properly be called a new game. So a bargain was struck. A skeleton crew would keep making Ura, while the rest of the team developed a full sequel, under the condition they only had 1 year to do it. Miyamoto told press he was serious, and if Aonuma couldn't hit the deadline, he'd cancel the sequel. Luckily, they managed to pull it off, and Majora's Mask released in early 2000. Miyamoto announced soon after that Ura Zelda was finished, and since 64DD flopped, maybe he'd sell it as a $20 cartridge. But the 64 generation was coming to a close, so he kinda didn't know what to do with it. A couple years later, GameCube was struggling, so they decided to give it away as a pre-order bonus for Wind Waker to help boost sales. In English, it's Master Quest, but in Japanese, it's still called Ura. After all those years waiting, though, a lot of fans were disappointed. This was less ambitious than Zelda 1's Ura. Where was the randomization, downloadable dungeons, and network features? Many were convinced the real Ura was locked in a vault somewhere. In reality, though, most of Miyamoto's big ideas never actually got developed. A decade later, Ocarina got remade for 3DS.
知る人ぞ知るもう一つの時のオカリナ、通称ウラゼルダ。
This was closer to the original vision. The entire game was flipped left to right, enemies dealt double damage, a new boss rush, and of course, remixed dungeons. But it still didn't live up to the promises of the original expansion. By the way, a Switch 2 Ocarina remake got announced just as we were writing this video, so it'll be interesting to see if anything from Ura makes a comeback. Next, we've got 2 cancelled games in a single story, a Zelda 1 remake and the third, Oracle. We've covered these before, but recently got some interviews translated with extra details. While the Zelda team was busting their chops making Majora's Mask, Miyamoto sat down for a Famitsu interview. He told him, "There's this shady character who's been popping up all over the industry lately. He says he absolutely loves Zelda." He meant Yoshiki Okamoto, the Capcom producer best known for Resident Evil and Street Fighter. In a German magazine, Okamoto shared his own perspective. "I especially like Zelda 1, he says, but Nintendo wouldn't port it to Game Boy Color, so I told Mr. Miyamoto I'd produce it myself. But we couldn't come to an agreement. So in the end, I threatened him. I said if Nintendo's not up for it, we'll release an identical game with different characters and just call it something else." His threat of a Zelda clone brought Miyamoto to the bargaining table. Despite the rough start, they quickly grew to like each other and worked out a deal. A one-to-one, square-for-square port. Then, with that experience under their belt, Okamoto's team would make 3 new Zelda games, the Triforce trilogy, and he promised they could make all 4 games in under a year. Miyamoto was blown away. Nintendo couldn't make one Zelda that fast. He said, "Wow, that's impressive. I thought Capcom is really something else." Okamoto told me, "You just take care of Majora's Mask and leave Game Boy to us." Then he took his contract for 4 Zeldas, dropped it in his team's lap, and left. He had to fly overseas to supervise games that needed more urgent attention. Okamoto loved Zelda 1, but his team didn't have any enthusiasm for a one-to-one port. They grew up with Zelda and were the first generation of fans who'd grown up to become developers. Fujibayashi was in charge of the day-to-day operations. He'd later move to Nintendo and direct the mainline series, but at this point, he was in his 20s working for Capcom. They were excited to inject some new ideas, so in Okamoto's absence, they started turning the port into a more ambitious remake. Then, before long, dumped it entirely and skipped ahead to making the trilogy. That'd turn out to be a mistake though, since half the point of the port was gaining experience. Originally, the plan was to make all 3 games simultaneously and release them 2 months apart. You could treat them as standalone titles or get all 3, and the story had changed depending on the order you played them in. Each would star a different goddess from Ocarina's lore and revolve around different styles of gameplay, just like the Triforce is made up of power, wisdom, and courage. One game would focus on combat, another on color-based puzzles, and the last had time mechanics. But it turned out harder than they expected. After a year passed without finishing a single game, Okamoto called in Miyamoto to save them. Miyamoto said they shattered his trust, but honestly, he was relieved Capcom couldn't actually make 4 games in under a year. If they could, him and Nintendo would feel like amateurs in comparison. But he told them if they hoped to finish anything, some hard decisions had to be made. Everything they made so far had to be thrown together and reshaped into 2 games, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. They ended up releasing on the same day, just 1 month before Game Boy Advance, which was basically their deadline. It was a nick-of-time slide into home plate, remembers Okamoto. As a silver lining, the delay let them add extra content for people who played on Game Boy Advance. And while it's unfortunate we didn't get that remake or a 3rd game, pretty much everything they developed did make it into the duology. The only exception, really, was unused story. All the other ideas they didn't have time for got repurposed in future Capcom Zeldas like Minish Cap. But before Minish Cap, Capcom ported Link to the Past to Game Boy Advance, with new content, lots of improvements, and a whole new game attached called 4 Swords. As the first multiplayer Zelda, it was a big deal at the time. After that, Nintendo took over and made a GameCube sequel, 4 Swords Adventures. Then, Nintendo's Zelda team started making another sequel, this time for DS. It had used both screens and wireless connectivity, but then, quote, Aonuma suggested we didn't continue with that. He said we should think of a completely new Zelda gameplay that would become a DS standard. So they changed direction and 3 years later wound up with Phantom Hourglass, and then Spirit Tracks. After that, some of the team wanted to steer the franchise back towards multiplayer. Quote, we were thinking about a Zelda game with the theme of communication. As soon as we started the presentation, I could clearly see Miyamoto's facial expression rapidly darkening. I thought, this is bad. And then at the end he said, this sounds like an idea that's 20 years old. That was the killing blow. We were down on the floor. He ripped it apart so badly that I was distraught. Don't feel too bad for him though, because that guy got promoted to director and made Link Between Worlds instead. Now, we'll end on something that's not a cancelled game by any stretch of the definition. Really, it's more of a pipe dream, but we'd love to see it come true. In 1996, ex-Capcom developers founded a studio called Inti Creates. A few years later, Capcom hired them to make the Mega Man Zero series for Game Boy Advance. They were so good, Capcom handed them the keys to the mainline series, and Inti Creates developed Mega Man 9 and 10. Later, when Koji Igarashi left Konami, he hired Inti Creates to make Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon as a spiritual successor to Castlevania 3. It was so successful, they made a sequel and dozens of other games too. All that to say, Inti Creates makes some of the best modern retro games out there. So, our ears perked up in 2018 when Inti Creates CEO Takuya Aizu said he wanted to remake Zelda 2. We reached out for an interview, but were worried about scaring him off, so we asked a bunch of questions about Mega Man and Bloodstained first. When we worked up the courage to ask about Zelda, he said, "I think there's no way this would happen, but if we were somehow bestowed with the chance to create this dream remake, and if we were to start development right away, I think it would be very aware of its Famicom disk system roots." We took that to mean it'd be 8-bit, like his other games we talked about a minute ago. Our interview was 6 years ago, so what he said next is probably more relevant today. He said, "If this dream remake were to happen a few years down the road, I think it would be made in a way that would be the most suitable for players at that time, using the best development techniques we have available at Inti Creates. But if you talk too much about your dreams, they cease to be dreams. So I think I'll leave it at that." Having played all his Mega Man and Bloodstained games and reading between the lines, it sounds like his Zelda 2 remake had been built from the ground up using pixel art and modernize the game somewhat, but remain faithful to the original concept as opposed to reimagining it into something entirely new. Aizu told us that he never pitched it to Nintendo and didn't think they'd be interested in that kind of game anyway. But a few years after we talked, Nintendo surprised us with F-Zero 99, which is kinda in the same ballpark. A low-budget, modern resurrection of an old classic. We'd love Zelda 2 to get the same treatment, especially from Inti Creates. Everything we've played from them was top-notch, and in our opinion, succeeded at what they set out to do better than any retro throwback on the market. Did you also know a bunch of Zelda games did release, but never in America? For facts on Navi trackers, the Tingle series, and all the other Zelda games we never got, click the video on screen. Special thanks to our translators and everyone willing to talk to us for interviews. And of course, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.